Hi everyone, I'm Paul Kinlan. I'm here with one of my good friends, Glenn.
Hello. Hi everybody.
So excuse some of the excuse some of the angles that we've got at the moment. We're just in a brand new recording studio in London. I believe you're actually our first external guest.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's cool. So today is Web Intense Wednesday. This is our fortnightly or bi-weekly coverage of what's happening in the world of Web Intense. So, yep, this is our first week in our new office with an external guest, which is pretty cool. Just a bit about me. So I'm a developer advocate at Google. I work at Chrome. And in particular, I work on a project called Web Intense, which is what we're talking about today. And our first talk that we had, I think it was about 4 weeks ago. I had to go on holiday. I say had to go on holiday. I wasn't forced to go on holiday. My first one of these, we did in a different room. We had Alex Komorowski, and we were talking generally about the project. And we didn't actually get to tell you anything about, well, we did get to tell you about Web Intense, but we didn't get to show you kind of how Web Intense worked in real life inside the browser. And that was because my machine wasn't set up properly. But today, I think we're all set up and we're good to go. And I'll give you a little demonstration about what Web Intense are. But before we do that, I'd just like to kind of ask Glenn to talk about himself, kind of what you're working on, what you've been working on in the past, and what you've done with Web Intense.
So I'm an independent developer. I've had my own company in the past, and I've been doing JavaScript for quite a long time. And I became interested in Web Intense about well over a year ago, actually, a place in Portland at Indie Web Camp, where there was a big discussion went on about Web Intense and the possibility there. Chris Messini actually brought the subject up, and that's really when my fascination started with it. My background's really design and user experience as well as doing coding. So at the beginning of this year, I tried to bring together a group of people in Brighton, an event called Design Push, where we looked at some of the sort of more UI elements of this. And I mean UI not just in terms of what goes on in the browser, but how you'd create buttons and the verbs you'd use and the language you'd use around it as well. So that's one element of it. But I've also been doing quite a lot of experimenting with the code as it's sort of progressed, as it's gone along, because I'm quite interested to start using it as soon as possible.
Yeah, you were, I think, was it Full Frontal last year?
Yeah, I did a talk at Full Frontal, and I did actually manage at the end of the talk to do a little demo with some contact stuff, because I'm quite interested in how to use contacts and like information you find, business people's information that you want to exchange backwards and forwards between applications. So I did a little demo there about contacts.
Yeah. So just to put that in the wider picture as well, you were using a couple of different APIs like drag and drop. Yeah. And then hooking up these applications together with Web Intense, and then did you also use protocol handler or?
I have done some work with the protocol handlers around picking up telephone numbers and things like that, also to bring that information in.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting, really. So thanks for that. Just before we dive into everything, I'm going to try and give you a really good demo of kind of what Web Intense are, how they work inside Chrome, because Chrome has got an implementation of the kind of the experimental implementation, at least, of Web Intense inside the browser. So I'm just going to do all this magic production and switch cameras. Cool. So you should be able to see my screen in front of me now. This is just a normal application. It's called ImageMaker. It's a very simple app. It's changed quite a bit since my very first version. We got some other people in to make it all look pretty, because the version prior to this was all programmer art. And you could tell it was programmer art from the start. Anyway. So this is our application. All it needs to do is be able to bring images into this application and then do some magic with it once, just do some general magic with it. So let me just show you kind of in action. And then I want to kind of briefly show you some code. It won't be much code because I think that's the part about Web Intense which is pretty cool. You can get applications to talk to each other with very little code involved. So anyway, this is our app. We're going to pick an image. There we are. And as you can see, we have a picker in front of us. It's a little kind of dialogue inside Chrome, which in theory can't be spoofed by any kind of normal web application. So the thing that happens here is we've got a list of applications that we can use: browse capture screen, capture browser screen, pick file from Cloud File Picker, and a whole load of other applications. These are applications that I've installed, and Chrome kind of supports the action of picking images. We also have some suggestions at the bottom of the screen: web page screenshot and image in haystack. These aren't installed, but all this information about what applications can do is stored in the Chrome Web Store. So we can query the Chrome Web Store to get a list of applications that might be able to help us fulfill this action. So anyway, let's have a look at a quick demo. So pick from Cloud File Picker. Cloud File Picker is just another application that we built that integrates with Google Drive. It's kind of pretty cool. So it's the normal kind of one-pick experience, or the single picker experience. Let's choose an image. This is one that people seem to like in me sometimes. This is actually a bug. It should take you back to your original application. But as you can see, once we've switched back, you can see the image has been brought back into our app. And once the image is on our application, we can actually do a couple of things. We can either save it to the cloud somewhere, share it somewhere else, or we can edit it. So the demo that we try and like to show is edit in action. So this is basically ask the browser for a list of applications that can support image editing. Not Word document editing, not video editing, just the ability to edit images. So we're going to edit in MemeMater, which is another application I built. And again, it looks a lot nicer than it did originally. So hot. Let's have a go. Oh, sorry, hot. As you can see, the image is updated. There it is. Let me scroll down, press done editing. And what should happen here is that the data that's been edited in one application has been brought back into this application. So the really cool thing about this is that we've integrated 3 or 4 different apps, but actually all we've done is we've asked the browser for some functionality. We haven't actually had to do deep integrations with these APIs. And I just want to show you the code. Hopefully this will work if I get this just right. Index.js. And I'll zoom in a bit so we can see it. This is the entirety of the application. It's about 40 lines of code. And as you can see here, we've got a save intent, or a save button click action. And then once we click the save, we fire off an intent. There's 2 lines of code to go off and find the applications that you want to use for common actions across the web and to deliver data. I think personally it's pretty powerful. And this is exactly what we're working on. These are the types of things that we're working on inside Web Intents. So, back to the mainstream. That was my demo of the application. It's kind of interesting. We've got the ability to hook up applications, which at the moment, from the way that I've developed apps in the past, we've never been able to easily do.
No, I mean, if you think about any other way of doing this, like with OAuth on the server, the amount of code you would need to actually wire 2 applications together using OAuth is really considerable compared to what we just looked at.
Yeah, actually, we didn't even touch on that. So the thing that's happening with here is normally when you have 2 applications, they talk to each other on the web. At the moment, you kind of pass the data from your web app kind of client side to the server. The server talks to another server with all the authentication stuff going on in the middle, and then goes from that service application maybe back into the client app on the other side. And at least what we've been trying to do with Web Intents in our case is say, well, quite often you have the data in one browser tab and you want to transition it to another application in another browser tab. Why can't you just deliver the data kind of from your page to the service page inside the browser? So that's a really good point, is we're not basically saying that you are going to deliver all data via kind of client-side only channels, but like the option in theory is there.
Yeah, a lot more simple, a lot easier to implement.
Yeah, so I have a script of things that we're going to talk about today at least. So just to kind of go over some of the things that have happened in the last 2 weeks. We've seen a lot of reports about Rss integration and Atom integration inside Chrome. Just to kind of give everyone a kind of overview of what this actually means and what's happened, is recently, I think it was at the start of this month, about 3 weeks ago, when the stable channel updated, we had some functionality inside Chrome which would basically say, well, whenever a user visits an RSS feed, whether it's the BBC News, and tell you what, I'll just actually show this as a demo now. So when the user visits, say the BBC for instance, I have no idea what's going to appear on the screen, clicks on an RSS feed. In the past, what's happened is that in Chrome in particular, it's just dumped the XML to the screen, which is a pretty bad experience for users. What we've got instead is the application will fire this thing called a view intent. Let's say the application Chrome will fire a view intent. So any RSS feed that you view and visit, it will pop up this picker that we see in front of us. So in this case, I've got 2 applications. One's called Message Boy, which is by Julien Genesto in France. I believe it's in France anyway. Feed Intent Viewer. And let's just have a quick look at Feed Intent Viewer. So we've taken the data from the BBC News feed and presented it back to Chrome. So right now, we don't have the ability to view the source that we used to have in Chrome, which a lot of developers have been asking for. The Feed Intent Viewer is designed, and it's made by Mihai on the Chrome Apps team. It's basically designed to let you do what you did in Chrome originally. Now our plan, and we're still working on this, our rough plan is to basically say, well, we want you to at least be able to use the default functionality that was in Chrome in the first place, but also still take advantage of web intents via the picker that we have. Hey, there's my picture.
So, I mean, that's really interesting because the viewer was one of the sort of things, like unlike edit and share, which to me was a little bit unexplained to start with. And this is a really nice example of how the viewer actually works in terms of it allows you to have alternative perspectives on something, another different way of viewing it, or gives you the choice of how to view something.
Yeah. So just to kind of jump back as well. So just to kind of jump back, there's actually a couple of different intents. So we've kind of come up on webintents.org with a list of kind of common actions that we think the user does across the web. They view things on the web, which is the view intent. They edit data. They share links, images, videos. They share a lot of things on the web. They pick data in and they save things back out to the cloud, whether it's Dropbox, Box.net, Google Drive. Yeah. And so we've got five or six different types of intents that cover those actions. And if we jump back to the application, you'll see that this is just the view intent. So like you said, it's a different perspective on the data that was on behind the URL at the time. So we've got a couple of different applications. Rss Feed Reader is a really nice Chrome extension. I actually want to talk about this one a little bit more because the guy, Eric, who built this application, he was basically one of the first people to actually integrate with the view intent. And once he had done that, it landed in Chrome, which is then available to every single user of Chrome. Once it's installed, it's available to every single user of Chrome. And because we can present the list of applications that you can use from the Chrome Web Store, like the discovery mechanism for finding and installing apps when you haven't got one installed already, he got a whole load of installs. I think, and he can tell you himself properly, he got about 60,000 installs in the first 5 or 6 days.
Wow, that's
and he's got, I did a check on the Chrome Web Store today, and he's got 220,000 installs for his Chrome extension that views intents. The Feed Reader as well is another popular one that Mihai made. It had about, I think, 14,000 after the first week or two. So the way I kind of look at it is that the more that you can integrate with Chrome, the more opportunities third-party developers have to integrate with the functionality that was never available to them before. So that's kind of an overview of that's basically an overview of what's kind of happened with the view intent.
So I've got a question. So if you were to ever say, when you view an image, usually, if you're just purely viewing the image and it just shows you the image in the corner of the screen, usually in there, if that was ever to be opened up in a similar way, we could build something that maybe did a nice sort of black screen, centered it, and maybe even read some of the metadata, like what camera was used to take that photograph or something like that, and provide a different view yet again on something that was very similar in terms of viewing things.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. Once you can start to think about opening up different types of file formats and things that people would just, like you said, they would just see the white screen for the rest of the image, and like the image would be the top left.
Yeah.
If you could provide, say, I don't know, Photoshop.com, for instance, or other different sites and apps and services, the ability to say, you know what, we're going to handle this data type.
Yeah.
Then I think that's a powerful kind of app ecosystem model in a way. You're integrating directly into the functionality of the browser, just to let the user use those actions.
And even something as simple as an image, which you think was, well, you just display it, that has information built into it, like the camera, where it was taken. You could even have geo information. You could put a map next to it and say this image was taken here.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's some of the goal. That's actually some of the goal. I think the fair thing to say at the moment is we've just started kind of conservatively.
Yeah.
Just RSS feeds and atom feeds. We are going to get a whole load of feedback because some of the stuff that we've found so far with just integrating the ability to view an RSS feed is it's driven the changes that we've made to some of the kind of things that we made in the spec recently. So I'm going to come on to this as well in a minute and kind of give you a summary of what's happened over at the W3C and on the specs about web intents at least.
But as soon as you start doing things like that, people like me start thinking about how can we use this and what's the next thing that can be done. Just like that, I just did.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, this is the powerful thing, right? It's like you can kind of get these little hooks into the browser. I mean, I want like web intents integrated everywhere across all the browser. I honestly don't think it's going to be there just yet. I mean, if I got my way, I would do it. But I think right now it's RSS feeds, atom feeds, things that people, we've always had a not great experience inside Chrome, and we want to let users use those apps. I think it's quite good.
And you can see how developers would like to see the raw code, and maybe a bit different ways of exploring it, with like spinning it out and stuff like that. But for other people, that might be just present it to be in nice paragraphs, like I would have in a normal RSS reader.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I just want to jump on to some of the questions of things that have happened over the week. So what's going to happen now is, I mean, if you want to come in with any questions, even if they're really hard questions, right, just ask, right? I just want to kind of briefly talk about some of the changes that have happened in the past week to the specification. So the thing that's happening at the moment is that we don't want web intents to be Chrome only. I mean, all the code is being committed into Chrome and into WebKit, which means that any WebKit-based browser can take advantage of web intents. But that's not the great story, right? I mean, you've got 300 million users potentially who could take advantage of Chrome, but the rest of the internet out there, the billions of users who use the internet now should be able to use the applications that they want to use. So our goal at the moment is to try and get this standardized and integrated into other browsers. So what's happening is we have a group which is kind of shared between the DApp on the W3C and the public web apps group, and then there's also some stuff going on the WhatWG at the same time, where we're basically talking about the things that we need from an API to make these applications interconnected, make it easy for developers to do. So some of the things that have happened recently, and literally it's like in the past week that we've made some of these talking about at least. I'll give you a little bit of background. It's probably best if I give you some background.
Yeah.
So the code that we had in the past for talking to an application inside web intents at least was you would invoke an intent, you'd make an intent object, give it the action, so I need to share this image, or so I need to share this thing, give it a data type, the thing that you want to share, so an image, I need to share an image, and then you would actually give the intent object the data that you wanted to share. And the way that we thought about it originally was, actually, this intent object, this data object, should just be the raw data. It should be a blob or a link to the URL, like a URL link to where, say, the image is.
Yeah.
And a lot of the feedback that we had, quite early on at least, and recently, is that it's not enough information. Right? If you've got an image, there might be some image data encoded, like meta information encoded into the image. But the problem that we've got is, well, the name. Where's the file name come from? If you're only passing the raw data, a blob, it has no concept of a file name. No. URL might have a file name, but it might not be really. It might be like a randomly generated ID that some social networking site generates for an image, not the actual physical name of the image itself. So we took all this feedback. People wanted all this extra metadata in, and originally we did this thing called set extra and get extra. So you'd basically set a key value pair programmatically, just via one method call, or one method call to set and one method call to read it, and it just. You spoke to developers, they hated it straight away, right? It was kind of analogous to the way that Android works in a way of setting extra data, but it didn't seem webby. And when we were building applications, it was like, well, I have to make 10 calls to set an object. Why can't I just pass a dictionary in? And then we were thinking, okay, well, we've got a dictionary. We could just say this extras is a dictionary. And one of the things that we're doing at the moment, and there's a thread on the W3C public intents list at the moment. The thread at the moment is saying, well, why do we even need two objects? Why do we need the actual data object and the payload and the extras object? Why can't we just have one object with a set of extra metadata and then the physical data itself? So we're kind of talking about it right now. We don't necessarily need to make changes inside Web Intents implementation inside Chrome, because the way that it works inside Chrome at least is that it shares a JavaScript object. So any object that you have that can be serialized via the structured clone algorithm can be passed between windows, essentially.
I mean, what you're talking about makes complete sense to me, because quite often when you're dealing with APIs, you have the concept of envelopes, where you have like the metadata, and then within that you have the object that's actually being passed. Often with an API that might be things like if it's a list of things, how many items are there, and how that was retrieved, and there always seems to be some sort of enveloping that goes on. It's very rare that just the data itself is passed across. So it makes a lot of sense to me that you would envelope this somehow. And although a dictionary is good, my personal view is that often I'll already have an object which is a representation of the data from wherever I've collected it from. So why can't I just, as long as that's understandable and it's agreeable, everybody's agreed on that as a structure, pass that backwards and forwards between.
So when you were passing microformat data, how did that work?
So strangely, microformat data, when microformats was first skimmed up, they never had a concept of JSON, a JSON structure for it, which has actually been rectified when they came around to look at the microdata format. Part of the microdata format is actually a very well-defined JSON structure for everything. The parser has to bring out something in a specific way, and it's actually part of the spec. So for the microformats community, I and a couple of other people actually wrote a spec for how you describe a parsed microformat in JSON.
Oh wow!
And it's called UF JSON or something like that. So what's actually being passed in that application I was using is a UF JSON object. And it itself has an envelope. It has things like what the parser was that parsed it, how long it took to parse it, the original URL, and any base href as well, because it has to actually sometimes do some sort of changes from absolute URLs to relative to absolute URLs.
Okay.
So there's little bits of small metadata that are encapsulated in that format.
That's actually really interesting. I should have spoke to you a lot more about this earlier on. Yeah, so I think that's the kind of model that we're starting to move to, at least anyway, where we need to be a little bit more prescriptive about the data formats. Even though you might say you're passing an image /PNG, you know, the extra types of metadata that we want to pass that you would say sit alongside the actual raw data itself.
Yeah.
And I think I remember when we first talked about web intents, like activity streams as well. They had verbs and objects, and at the time it was like, well, actually they're pretty well defined objects. They were defined in XML at the time. Because they were meant to be integrated into Atom and Atom feeds. The question that came up was, well, I think it happened as well, was can you do that in JSON? And I think they had a method for representing those objects in JSON.
They did, yeah. They moved on to doing that. Yeah.
So this is me learning something now. So with microdata, that's part of the HTML5 spec.
I believe so, yeah. And so it was one of the learnings that came out of the whole sort of microformats thing. That if you're going to embed the parsers into the browsers, then you have to have a way of a representation.
So is that like serialized with a to-JSON method, or is that?
Now you're getting beyond maybe what my knowledge is. I know I had looked at that, and that's something I want to look at actually next. How you get that out?
Yeah, because that'd be kind of cool, right? If you could literally just pass a DOM element in as your data, understand that actually, well, you can't pass DOM elements across, but if we could say as part of the structure clone algorithm or the algorithm that takes data from like client to service, that it will call a to-JSON method or something on an object, and if the HTML elements supported it and then went through the rules for passing that into microdata, and then just return the JSON, that'd be.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be a format for putting this information out, and it's a JavaScript API built into a browser, so it has to be JSON basically is the object that comes out.
That's really kind of interesting, that, because I can see.
Well, an object literal. We always say JSON. It's an object literal.
JavaScript object. Well, hey, but that's actually really interesting, because one of the things that I was thinking about was you could either write a Chrome extension, for instance, or have it built into the browser where if you detected these objects like living inside the page, is that you could provide contextually aware actions off those objects. So if you found like a person, it just looked like a person's address.
Yeah. So I mean,
but it was
the technique you're talking about is actually what I did, because I built a JavaScript parser for microformats that was built for people to make extensions with, and it was based off some original work from Mozilla ages ago. But I took it and I stripped it down, and it's called microformat shiv, and it's actually the main Chrome extension that displays microformats uses this code, and it does exactly what you're talking about. It's got a method which you pass in the DOM ornament, and it passes back this UF JSON structure for you.
And do you manage that extension?
Yeah, someone else has actually built the extension, but I built the parser and built it in a way so that people could build extensions with it. It's basically a library that I built for people to put in.
So does it detect it in the page, or detect it in like a little tab, like a little button across the top?
The library itself, you basically have to say. Give it a DOM element, and it will tell you whether there's. It will actually give you a count as well. So if you just want to see if there's something in there. So most of the extensions that are parsing information first look just for a trigger. So they'll say, okay, has this got one of the classes that would be a top level class? In which case, now let's parse a whole document and find the structure. And that's how most of the microformats parsing extensions work.
I've got little things going in my head. I kind of got some ideas. Yeah, I actually wouldn't mind trying to do something with that.
One of the things I want to do as well is obviously the microdata thing. I think is not something that I built a parser for, because I know the browser manufacturers, vendors are going to build them because it's part of the HTML5 spec. At some point that will come forward. But I'd like to also do some of this stuff for maybe the Facebook Open Graph data, and newly the Twitter card system as well, which are both two different types of metadata that are now being put into websites on large scales because of the SEO benefit and the ability to get your content shared into social systems. Of course, obviously, with microdata, we've also got that sharing into Google+, but some parsers that do similar things that pull that data as well.
Yeah.
and make that available.
I would actually like to be able to just deliver objects that we find on a web page to any application that says it can support it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Cool. So jumping back to the subject, we are getting rid of the extras, get extra and set extra.
Yeah.
I'd say we're getting rid of it. It's part of a kind of a specification and standards process. So obviously we need to get commitment from kind of all participants in the group. I think it looks pretty positive generally. So that's extras. We are just going to say that the data that you pass along should have all this extra information in. From a documentation point of view, we need to be really smart about how we document the data that should be embedded in these data, like in these data types that get passed, because we got like experience on other systems where one might expect a title, and if a service doesn't send a title, then what happens to the client application and all this type of stuff. So I think we can set some really good best practices and documentation for how this is going to work.
Yeah, I mean, my only point there would be to you reuse obviously as much as possibly out there.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting area with contacts is that obviously you've got this beautiful thing with vCard, which has then been reused by the microfinance community as HCard.
Yeah.
It's nearly a one-to-one match across.
Yeah.
So it's always about paving those cowpats and reusing as much as you possibly can.
I mean, so this is an interesting point. I think the DAP were talking about delivering contacts.
Yeah.
And I think they were talking about
The
doing a new contact API, but using intent, but then they'd have to describe the delivery mechanism.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that we should.
So I saw some of the original discussion on the mailing list about this, and it looks like the sort of some of the mechanisms that they're using are very similar to the portable contacts work that was done, which again was actually based on some of the original HCard, vCard work.
Yeah.
So that you always get some sort of layering that's going on. I think the interesting thing is to make sure that you as much as possible base things on earlier standards, so that you don't have to translate so much material from one thing to another. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, I actually need to go back to activity streams as well, because they had a whole lot of data formats that were relatively well specified out for image, like especially for images as well. So recent changes to the API. This hasn't happened yet, but on the list, there's talk about origin, and what they're trying to say is that. So origin is kind of interesting. HTTPS, obviously the referrer never goes through when you do a HTTPS to HTTP call at least. Just by a normal web request. So the referrer is always lost. So they started to introduce this idea of a HTTP origin header, so that you could at least understand the domain that certain things came from. And the request that's happened recently on the Web Intents mailing list on the W3C is that can we include this origin information in the payload of the data that's being transferred between Web Intents?
So I think there's a really interesting point there, which I don't know if anybody's brought up yet, which is if you include origin, so where the materials come from, the receiving site then can do some interesting things with authentication, which I think is the main reason that people are interested in this. But it also has a slight darker mechanism that could kick in, which would be that a receiving site could say, actually, I'm only going to accept data from certain other sites. And actually be a blocking mechanism, which is what we found with OAuth, because originally there was two ways of doing OAuth, one which would have been completely open and one OAuth site would have dealt with another one and stuff like that, but it actually ended up work with people running white and black lists for, okay, we're going to open up and we're going to allow people to OAuth between our site and take maybe contacts or something like that from one site to another, but we're only going to allow authorized sites.
I mean, that was actually some of the kind of the thing that people were asking for inside this part of the spec.
And Origins could give them that, because if
I'm generally against it. When we were first thinking about the API, I didn't want client application to know about service application and service application to know about client application.
Yeah.
At some point, they might be able to discern the information. So if you passed an image that was just the URL and you had like image.twitter.com, whatever it is, there's a good chance that the image was shared from Twitter or somewhere else, but you're never actually quite too sure. It's one of those things that this is the whole point about specification and standards process, is that we talk these things out. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think
Right.
anyone knows it. I mean,
I
it was
think-
only brought on the list like 2 days ago.
I think it's a very prickly subject because I can definitely see the benefits for widening some of the use cases and
Yeah.
stuff, but there might be a reasonably serious sort of downside to this, which takes away some of the ability of the browser to be this completely transparent mediator that sits in the middle and isn't sort of you don't have the sort of commercial linkages that
Yeah.
you get with your system.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff. Yeah, I don't quite know just yet. I mean, if origin was going to be a factor, and because you didn't want to receive data from certain services, I'd rather that was part of your declaration of what you could say you could handle, so that the browser could just not show your application in the list.
Yeah.
Because I just think if you deliver data to some application, which is then going to reject you, it's a bad user experience, right?
Oh, definitely.
So we don't. I think the answer is we don't quite know just yet. We're going to talk it out, see what happens. But as always, if you have any feedback and you have any particularly strong opinions about kind of whether, for instance, origin should happen or whether the way that we're going to deal with extra metadata, please just get in the public web intents list on the W3C. Or if you're trying to work out how to implement various parts of the API, we've also got a Google Groups discussion group. So I encourage you to, I think it's Web Intents Discuss. I encourage everyone to go and view those pages, at least anyway. Fire us some emails. Email me, paulkinlan@google.com, if you have any questions that you want to get answers to, that you don't want to put on your lists. We try and get everything in the open, but if you want to talk to me, that's fine as well. That's cool. So let me jump back. I think we actually covered quite a lot of ground.
Right.
I've actually run out of the things that I was supposed to go through at some point. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing I find about web intents is that, for me at least, I've learned a lot about the specification and standardization process. It's been pretty good at the DAP. Everyone has been kind of open and talking about the things that they want. We have on the device group at least, people wanting to integrate with devices outside of your machine. I think I did a podcast for SitePoint last week, and they basically said, what's the most exciting thing? So, oh man, there's so much. We can integrate with devices outside of your machine. So the idea is like web intents, the scope is very much firmly in connecting web applications to other web applications.
Yeah, we sort of had this, didn't we, at the design push when we were talking about the different use cases.
Yeah.
And it sort of started off at the beginning of the day when we were trying to explain to a lot of the UX designers who turned up to the event all the different possible ways it could be used. That they focused initially on the whole share bit and the share buttons, because that's a really common use case.
Yeah.
But as the day went on, people became more and more interested in the idea of sharing more complex data between applications and less interested in the more obvious sort of sharing intents at the beginning, which I found really interesting, that sort of shift as people start to see the broader picture.
Yeah, I always think the other intents are more interesting than share. I mean, share is the one that everyone just says, we just need to sort some way of getting rid of all these buttons, all these different options inside pages.
Yeah.
And is web intents going to do that? I think yes, it can. I think there's a whole lot of stuff that has to be solved around branding, and which we talked about this design push around branding, kind of letting users understand that the button that they're going to click on is going to let them share to their preferred network. Social reinforcement, that was actually one of the areas that you talked about quite a lot, wasn't it? It was social reinforcement. The fact that you see that your friends have done certain actions on the page is actually quite influential, and web intents doesn't solve that. It doesn't say that, your mother clicked on this type of thing.
I think if you look at the share and what you're going through some of the sort of plus and minus points in terms of moving over to web intents, there is a definite case for doing it. But the difference between the benefit that you get from a share, I think, from looking at the benefit you'll get from some of these edit type functionality that you were just showing about moving data from one application to another, editing it and bringing it back again, then the benefit is really massive, and it's quite hard to achieve it any other way. Whereas at the moment we have something that sort of works with the share stuff at the moment. Everybody doesn't like it. It's not quite what we want and stuff, but it sort of works. Well, it sort of works. There's billions of interactions every year using those buttons. But with the edit, that's actually a completely new game, and I think so that's where it is. I think it's a difference between your perceived benefit. You can actually see that the benefit with implementing the more edit ones.
Yeah, I mean, I've been honestly surprised by the uptake of the view and RSS feeds. I think that's got a lot of potential. It's like I was always talking to people. It's like, what is the most popular intent or the best intent? it's like naming one of your kids, right? It's like, you're my favorite son. But it's like the idea behind it was like, well, I actually think share is the one that everyone's going to think about. Actually, things like edit, pick, and save. This cycle of taking data from one app, manipulating it, and then sending it back into like Dropbox or these types of services is actually really powerful, and that's the one that'll be kind of that. Those three will be the ones that are going to really take off. Obviously, we have to do a whole lot of work to get partners and services and everything integrated into that. But when you look at kind of the client, if the browser is the client, then you only need services to fulfill one side of it. And I think that's where the Vue, and especially for Vue and RSS and Vue and Vue Atom feeds, they've been really popular so far. Is that actually you only have to tell the get services to integrate with the browser rather than integrate with other applications.
Yeah.
And at some point in the future, people will start to say, well, we're going to fire a Vue feed intent ourselves, like from our app, rather than have the browser do it automatically and all those type of things. And then those apps will start to build up. So you get more clients and services and clients, services and clients, and it'll grow out. I think it'll be kind of cool. Yeah, I've been kind of just going all over the place. I actually want to show one thing. And let me just flick back to the screen share. One other piece of information before we get into questions. We've got 7 questions to go through. One of them was a little bit of spam. Someone tried to do a script inject on the page. There it is. He's lead. I hope it didn't work. I'm pretty sure it didn't work. But the thing that happened recently is Greg Billick, one of our engineers over in Los Angeles, fixed a bug that I've had with web intents for a long time, which is that you can never invoke web intent from a browser action. And for those who don't know about Chrome, at least, a browser action is this little thing here in the top left or to the top right of the screen, like contextually aware actions, essentially. So I've got a couple. I've made a few. There's an RSS feed one, which is the RSS Feed Reader app extension that Eric wrote. This is share, right? This is like a share button. It's just an extension. It's not integrated or anything. It's just an extension that's built into Chrome. But as you can see, we can fire the intent. So we could say, I don't know, I can't share to Google Plus because it's not a public account. It's my web intents account, which no one ever uses, so no one will ever see the demo. But there we go. That's the moderated link to the page we just shared.
Right.
Questions, please, from Web Intents live on air. So if you see this now, it's history being made. We've just shared out that live from the browser, but that's because Greg implemented this fix which allows you to do these types of things.
Is it the same sort of stuff where he does the context menu as well? You can use the context
So
menu.
I actually, this is an extension I wrote. This is like the image. You can share link.
Right.
Link to image. It's not actually sharing the raw image data, it's just sharing the link to the image data.
Which is really nice because you can imagine things like video as well and all sorts of the different types of media that can be on a page.
Yeah. So this is actually, so it can do videos, audio files, links, share links, so it knows it's sharing a link, not an image. Oh, there's a bug there. Oh no, there isn't because it's a link as well. Share link to image and share link. So I think it's pretty cool. It opens up quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can do videos, RSS feeds. No, it can't do RSS. Obviously, it can do RSS feeds because it's a link. But yeah, so
it gets to this point where you can actually start to share elements of the page, not just the whole page itself, with context menu.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to actually be built into the browser. So you can just have an extension which.
So I could imagine if you swipe something like a piece of text or something, you could have like the equivalent of like a share to a quoting type.
Yeah, I mean,
site
exactly
like
right. Like you share to Tumblr as a quote rather than as a link.
Yeah,
those type of things would be pretty cool. So actually, that's why I wanted to speak to the guys who did the microformat extension, because what I was thinking about is if you could detect things on the page where there's like a person, you could do a right-click context-aware menu, and then say share this to your address book or share this to, those different types of actions. It'd be pretty cool. I'll get in contact. So if you're watching this, I'm coming after you. So anyway, we got 5 minutes left. I think we're only supposed to be here for 45 minutes. Questions? Yeah, I'll skip that. No, I won't. Seems like a lot of stuff from Anon somewhere. Seems like a lot of stuff pretty much deals on web intents first becoming a standard. Could you outline the rough process of what needs to happen before it's accepted, what stage web intents is at, and any contribution feedback we can help to accelerate its approval? Wow. So yeah, the process is pretty interesting. We are part of the W3C process right now. We're at first public working draft, which is different to an editor's draft. Editor's draft is like pretty much, I think any member can make an editor's draft. Then it needs to get accepted, I believe, at least by one group before it goes to an editor, first public working draft. You then work on it. It's not a specification, or it's not. It's a specification. It's not a standard at that point, but you're kind of working towards that process. So we're still at the first public working draft. I think we've got a couple of months to iron all the stuff out, and then we have, I believe, a call for consensus later on, and then a whole lot of other stuff. We're at, just to put it bluntly, we're at the second stage. The very first stage is just getting it on there. The second stage is where we are right now.
There's been a lot of refinement already, hasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of refinement. So the general process is feedback that either I capture from the web and kind of general sentiment, I try and deliver to the public intents group, public web intents group, at least on the W3C. Or and I encourage everyone who's kind of wants to see the API change for a specific reason, or even just to say, look, we support this kind of way of working, all those types of things, use cases and a whole load of other stuff, is to go to the public web intents list on the W3C, and then just give us your feedback, because it's like, if we develop this API in complete isolation, we might find out it doesn't serve 90% of the things that we want to do, and 90% of the developers don't use it. And if they don't use it, we don't get users, which means we don't get anyone benefit from this.
The most useful thing I've always found to have input, because it's quite difficult to get involved with the spec element of it because of the way it works, is to actually talk about use cases that you have, specific things.
Yeah.
And if you can't find out a way of doing it using what's already been said, to ask the question, I have this use case, I want to do this, how would I do it like this? Because that actually provides the developers with a really interesting sort of hook to think of about things.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens, right? That's what's happening with the Origin talk at the moment, is there is a very specific use case that someone wants to solve, which we can't, honestly, we can't solve right now in intent the way the specification is designed. So it's like, do we either accept it, reject it, or some kind of where in between? And that's the whole process is right now, is like, we're at this stage where we're just talking about it. The idea of web intents being, it needs to be a standard for people to implement it. It depends on, I think it depends on usage inside the browser, usage of services, because services can adopt it once it's in one browser, but we don't want it to be in one browser. We want it to be across multiple browsers, and that's a whole heap of extra work that needs to go on, and conversations that happen with all the browser vendors. The thing I would say is that it is going into WebKit, which means that if you're a browser vendor who implements WebKit or a port of WebKit, as long as you kind of take those ports across, you could in theory turn on web intents, whether you choose to or not. You just have to implement all the rest of the logic behind it. So yeah, that's kind of roughly where we are. Next question. So Patrick Allord, I know that name. If web intents are meant to replace share buttons among other things, would there be a way to know if you already shared something? If, for example, if I +1 something, the +1 button shows up red. Are there plans for web intents to support that? So I kind of answered that before, where we didn't have. Web intents doesn't kind of do that social proof and reminding of the things that you've done. It's not designed to actually say, well, you know what, you've shared this link before, you might not want to share it again, and all those types of things. The thing I would say, and you can, your opinion is completely valid and appreciated, is that I think there are other services, and AddThis have done this recently, where AddThis have integrated with web intents as well as their other services, but they still provide that aggregation and social proof. So it's still a widget, that does kind of all the work for counting what's happened on the social web, for instance. But that's their service. They provide a whole load of other services outside of the just sharing. People think they're a sharing service. It's like they're not just that. They're analytics, user management, metrics, and all those types of things. And I personally think that's where that's going to live still.
I think there is an answer to this particular question in that there's two ways that this could happen. So when the share goes off, that you're actually within web intents, rather than it just not giving a return, that there should be like a success return back to the site. And at that point, you as a site could then record that information that's been done, and then mark that button, because the button is actually controlled by you. So you kick it off, you design it, it's got your images or text in it, and hook in the intents by using the JavaScript or on-click or whatever you're going to use.
Yeah.
So you could do it that way, or a slightly worse way would be, if you don't get the success, just to actually record it anyway. Record the click. That doesn't say that it's actually successfully being done, but at least you know that someone's clicked there. So I think there is mechanisms to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, and I think there'll be services that pop up that do it. I think AddThis, at least, are a good example of they're integrating with web intents, because it's like built into the platform, but at the same time, sharing isn't their main. Well, I don't know. They'll tell you what their main business is, but it's the rest of what they offer is the thing that they do. Analytics, metrics, all those types. Those type of things. Just the facility to share is one very small aspect. And it's kind of interesting actually. This type of how to say, so yeah, this type of +1, you +1 something, or you've shared this. I think that's very specific just to the share intent.
Yeah.
I've never seen that. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Save, you've already saved this. Great, I might want to save it again to a different service, all that type of stuff. I can't imagine some other intents using this type of...
No, because they don't use the same sort of... When we talked earlier about social proof, which is that bit, that's a bit where you get like the little icons of the people that have already done this that are part of your social network. It's sort of basically an encouragement, or a number that tells you X number of people have done this. It's a way of encouraging you to do it. And you're right, at the moment I've only ever seen it used in the terms of sort of the share type implementations, or the likes or stuff like that, which are a very similar thing.
Yeah, yeah. We're actually really running out of time, so I'm really sorry about this. So how will the UX work for Chrome packaged apps? Will the selected external app open inside the app itself, or hand focus over to a separate browser window in a tab not as magical? Will there be a way to send that intent only to packaged apps? So yeah, we've got this thing called explicit intents, which allow you to deliver data to a known application. I know you've got a whole load of questions about suggestions, which I don't believe we've implemented just yet.
No, leave that for another day.
Yes, but explicit intent allow you to deliver data from one app to another directly if you know about it. The way it's going to work in packaged apps is, the way it actually works in Chrome now is it always opens a new tab. If it's a packaged app, the new style packaged app, it should open a brand new instance of that application because you won't have any browser Chrome. So, yes is the answer. Is there a shim or a polyfill for web intents? I think the answer is no. How could we collaborate to make one? There is one. webintents.org/webintents.min.js. It tries to emulate web intents, the API. It needs update. It needs some love for Firefox. I had to turn on content security policy, which broke in Firefox but still worked in Chrome and WebKit. The interesting thing is the web intents shim actually worked on Android, iPhone, Opera as well.
Yeah.
So there is a shim. GitHub, my GitHub account, github.com/Paul Kinlan /web intents. I would love your support. If you can offer any support for building out this shim, please do. I'm really looking forward to getting some. This is the last question before I'll get kicked off. Is most development around web intents focused on the Chrome extension or the cross-browser pure JS implementation? Can I happily work with and use web intents from Firefox, non-Chromium browser at the moment? It's both. We can offer a good experience inside Chrome right now and kind of prototype and rapidly develop things that aren't purely available on the open web. If we've landed the intent tag actually exists in the web intent source base. It's just not enabled. You can't run it inside there. If we introduce these things and we get a whole lot of developers building on this on the public open web, then it's harder to take back those things. You can still take back those changes, but it's harder. So inside, there's a relatively closed ecosystem, I suppose, inside the Chrome.
Can you switch it on as a dev flag at the moment? The intent,
not the
tag?
Not the intent tag. No,
Okay.
it's compile time flag. There's a whole lot of things that we have to work out around that, so that's why it's not available just yet. To counteract that for other browsers, we do have the shim. Like I said, we need as much help as possible to kind of keep that up to date. So please fork my repository, follow me as well, and we'll go from there. So that's it. I believe that is it. I would like to thank you very much for watching. I'd like to thank Glenn for participating. I know this is very last minute. He came along for a chat and I said, you know what, we're going to go on air in a minute. Do you want to join in?
It's fine, we had our chat on air.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So yes, thank you very much. I will be back again in 2 weeks, but I'll be in America next time rather than London. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.